long before stone thrones rose beneath the Ethiopian sun, before coins bore the faces of kings, and before ships crossed the Red Sea carrying gold and ivory, there was the land. The highlands breathed slowly in the dawn. Mist drifted across terraced hills, clinging to ancient fig trees and jagged rock outcrops. Rivers young and impatient cut silver paths through the soil, carrying stories from the mountains toward distant seas. The earth here was dark and generous, shaped by fire long forgotten. To the north, the land sloped downward toward the burning horizon of the Red Sea. To the south, it climbed toward cloud-wrapped peaks where spirits were said to live. This was AksUM, though no one yet called it that. The earliest people of this land did not build cities. They built memory. They lived in small clusters, their homes circular and low, made from stone and earth. They herded cattle with long horns and sang to them at dusk. They planted barley and teff, trusting the rhythm of the rains. Every hill had a name. Every river had a temper. They believed the world was alive. The sun was not merely light. It was a watcher. The earth was not soil. It was a mother. And the sky was a vast, silent judge. At night, elders told stories beside firelight. They spoke of ancestors who had crossed deserts, of spirits who guarded springs, and of a time when humans and gods still shared the same language. No written word preserved these tales. Yet they endured, carried in song. Ritual and fear. Far to the north, across the Red Sea, other civilizations were rising. In South Arabia, powerful kingdoms like Saba, Sheba, carved temples from stone and worshipped moon gods. Their merchants sailed the sea in wooden ships stitched together with rope, guided by stars and monsoon winds. Some of them reached the African shore. They came seeking incense, gold, animal skins, and slaves. At first, they stayed near the coast. But trade has a way of pulling people inland. Toward rivers and fertile ground. They brought new ideas. Writing carved into stone, monumental architecture organized. Religion, kingship as divine authority. The local people did not resist these ideas, nor did they fully surrender to them. Instead, they absorbed. The land of the highlands reshaped everything it touched. First great transformation came with stone. Not simple huts or walls, but stone raised. Skyward, men began to quarry rock from the hills, shaping it with astonishing precision. They dragged massive blocks across the land using wood, rope, and sheer human will. These stones were erected upright, piercing the sky like frozen lightning. They were steely. Some were small. Others were enormous towering slabs, carved to resemble multi-storied buildings, complete with false doors and windows. No one alive could fully explain how they were raised. The stelae were not merely monuments. They were bridges between worlds. Beneath them lay the dead kings, chiefs, and ancestors. Above them stretched the heavens. The living stood between, reminded of both mortality and power. This was the first sign that a state was forming. Slowly, a settlement grew where trade routes crossed and fertile soil met high ground. It was not yet a city, but it was becoming one. Markets formed. Craftsmen shaped pottery and metal. Priests claimed authority over rituals. Warriors guarded caravans. Foreign merchants arrived speaking unfamiliar tongues, bringing silver and stories from beyond the sea. This place became known as AksUM, not a capital yet, not a kingdom yet, but a center. Here, power was no longer scattered among clans. It was concentrating like water, gathering behind a dam. Before Christianity, before crosses, before churches carved into stone, the people of AksUM worshipped many gods. There was Marum, god of war and royal power, believed to be the divine father of kings. There were sky gods and earth spirits, moon deities borrowed and transformed from Arabia. Sacrifices were offered grain. Animals, incense seeking favor and protection. King was not just a ruler, he was a chosen son of the gods. This belief would become the backbone of AksUMite authority. History remembers empires through names, but AksUM's earliest rulers remain nameless. They ruled before coins bore faces, before inscriptions listed victories. Their power survives only in stone, in burial sites, in the shape of the city itself. Yet they did something extraordinary. They unified people, controlled trade routes stretching from the African interior to the Red Sea. They organized labor on a scale unseen in the region. They laid the foundations for laws, taxation, and centralized authority. They turned AksUM from a place into a promise. By the first centuries of the Common Era, AksUM stood at the edge of greatness. Its position was unmatched. Between Africa and Arabia, between the Mediterranean world and the Indian Ocean, between ancient tradition and incoming change, caravans arrived with gold from the south. Ships sailed with ivory and incense. Foreign powers began to notice. The world was expanding. And AksUM was ready to rise. But with power comes conflict. With trade comes ambition. And with gods comes destiny. In the next chapter, AksUM will step onto the stage of history not as a shadow, but as a rival to Rome, Persia, and India. The moment a king places his face on metal, he announces something to the world. He declares that his authority travels farther than his voice, farther than his army, farther even than his lifetime. In AksUM, that moment came not with thunder or prophecy, but with coins. By the late 1st century CE, AksUM had crossed an invisible boundary. It was no longer merely powerful. It was recognized. Foreign traders now spoke its name in ports along the Red Sea. Roman merchants recorded it in their accounts. Sailors plotted routes with AksUM in mind, aware that its rulers controlled both land and sea passages. This transformation required more than strength. It required identity. And identity demanded names. The earliest AksUMite ruler known to history is King Zoskals. We know him not from AksUMite chronicles, those would come later, but from a Greek maritime guide. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. To foreign eyes, Zoskals was sharp-minded, occasionally difficult, yet fair in trade. He governed ports and inland routes alike, collecting taxes and regulating commerce. Under his rule, AksUM began to speak the language of the wider world. Greek became the tongue of diplomacy and trade. Weights and measures were standardized. Customs duties were enforced. AksUM was learning how empires behave. Zoskals did not build a vast army or carve his name into mountains. His achievement was quieter and more enduring. He made AksUM legible to the world. Soon after, AksUM began minting its own coins. This was revolutionary. Unlike barter goods or foreign currency, these coins bore AksUMite symbols, royal profiles, religious signs, inscriptions in Greek. Gold, silver, and bronze flowed from royal mints, stamped with unmistakable authority. A coin could cross deserts and seas without an escort. It could pass from hand to hand, carrying the king's image into foreign markets in distant cities. The message was clear. AksUM was sovereign. AksUM was wealthy. AksUM was permanent. While coins traveled outward, stone rose upward. The great stelae of AksUM multiplied in size and ambition. Some stood over 20 meters tall, carved with precision that defied explanation. False doors symbolized passage to the afterlife. Tiered windows mirrored royal palaces. These monuments were not merely funerary. They were political statements. Each stele declared that the king beneath it commanded enough labor, wealth, and belief to move mountains. No Roman column or Egyptian obelisk to be more direct. And yet, unlike Egypt, AksUM hid its dead beneath the earth, humbled before the gods. Even in glory, AksUM's power flowed along trade routes like blood through veins. From the African interior came gold, ivory, rhinoceros horn exotic animals. From Arabia and beyond came silver fine. Textiles, wine, and olive oil. Idea ships left the port of Agilis, hugging the coast before catching monsoon winds to India. Others sailed north toward Ramang, Egypt. Caravans carried goods inland, guarded by warriors loyal to the king. Every transaction fed the royal treasury. Every route tightened AksUM's grip on the region. By the 3rd century CE, AksUM had become one of the great powers of the ancient world. Persian envoys spoke of it cautiously. Roman administrators listed it alongside Persia and China as a force beyond their borders. South Arabian kingdoms watched it with growing unease. AksUM was no longer borrowing ideas. It was competing. Its kings styled themselves not merely as rulers, but as King of Kings, a title loaded with ambition. This claim signaled dominance over lesser rulers and subject territories, extending authority beyond the highlands. Control of the Red Sea meant control of wealth. AksUMite fleets, small but effective, protected shipping lanes. When necessary, armies crossed the sea itself, intervening in Arabian affairs. No African kingdom had ever projected power so confidently beyond its shores. Stone inscriptions recorded victories. Gods were thanked. Enemies were named and humbled. AksUM had learned the lesson all empires learn. Trade creates wealth. Wealth demands protection. Protection invites war. Throughout this expansion, religion remained central. The king was still believed to be the son of Maram, god of war and power. Victories proved divine favor. Defeats demanded ritual correction. Priests and kings walked together, bound by belief and mutual necessity. But belief is never static. Foreign merchants brought new faiths with them. Jewish communities settled in the region. Christian ideas whispered through ports and caravans. At first, they were curiosities. Soon, they would be challenges. By the early 4th century, AksUM stood at its peak. Its kings commanded gold and armies. Its monuments touched the sky. Its name echoed in Dastan. Yet beneath the stone and ceremony, something was shifting. A new god was approaching, not carried by conquest, but by conviction. A faith that would redefine kingship itself. A belief that would turn crosses into symbols of power. The greatest transformation in AksUM's history was coming, and it would begin with a single king. Power teaches a king many things, but faith teaches him who he is allowed to become. When Ezana ascended the throne of AksUM in the early 4th century CE, he inherited an empire balanced on stone pillars, gold coins, and ancient gods. He was young, but not untested. He had been trained in war, schooled in ritual, and taught that his blood carried divine fire. Yet the god who would shape his reign did not come from stone, temples, or war chants. He came quietly. Ezana did not rule alone at first. Beside him stood a foreigner, Frumentius, captured years earlier when his ship wrecked on the Red Sea coast. Frumentius had risen within the royal court through intellect and restraint. He served first as a scribe, then as a tutor. He spoke Greek fluently and understood the ways of Rome, Egypt, and the Mediterranean world. More importantly, he was a Christian. At first, Frumentius did not preach openly. He taught ethics, languages, and administration. He answered questions when asked. He lived his faith rather than announcing it. And Ezana watched. Ezana's early reign was marked by conflict. To the west and south, rebellious territories resisted AksUMite control. To the north, Nubian powers tested borders. Across the sea, Arabian kingdoms grew restless under AksUM's influence. Ezana led armies personally. Stone inscriptions carved in GEs record his campaigns, burned cities, captured enemies, triumphant returns. These texts still invoked Maram, the old god of war. thanking him for victory. Yet something had changed. The tone was uncertain. Where earlier kings sounded absolute, Azana's words seemed searching, as if he was listening for an answer that did not yet speak. Victory no longer felt guaranteed. Azana won battles, but he also saw suffering. He saw villages emptied, fields burned, and prisoners marched in chains. He saw the fragility of power, how quickly the gods of stone demanded blood. Christianity offered something different, not weakness but order, a single God, a moral universe, a king ruling by divine justice rather than divine violence. Frumentius spoke of emperors who bowed before Christ, of Rome itself shifting faith. He spoke of a God who demanded humility from rulers and promised eternity beyond monuments. Azana. Listen. There was no single THUNDERCLA. No vision recorded in flame. Azana's conversion unfolded. Quietly, privately, then decisively. Around 330 CE. The king chose the cross. Coins changed first. Where once the disk and crescent appeared, now a cross stood. Gold still shone, but its message was transformed. The king's image remained, but his divine patron had changed. Stone followed metal. New inscriptions thanked the Lord of Heaven rather than Maram. Temples gave way to churches. Ritual blood sacrifices faded, replaced by prayer. AksUM had become one of the first Christian states in the world. Not everyone welcomed this change. Priests of the old gods lost power. Noble families tied to traditional cults resisted quietly. Some regions refused new rituals. Conversion was uneven, layered, and sometimes tense. Azana did not persecute openly. Instead, he restructured. Christian bishops were appointed. Frumentius traveled to Alexandria, where the patriarch ordained him as the first bishop of AksUM. Churches rose near palaces and markets. Christian ethics seeped into law. The king was no longer the son of a war god. He was now God's chosen servant. Faith did not end war. It reframed it. Azana continued military campaigns, now invoking the Christian God for victory. His inscriptions described triumphs granted by divine will, enemies humbled by heavenly justice. AksUM expanded its influence deeper into Nubia and across the Red Sea. The cross traveled with soldiers, carved onto banners and shields. This was not the Christianity of monks and silence. This was imperial faith. Under Azana, AksUM reached the height of its power. Trade flourished. Diplomacy with Rome deepened. The kingdom stood as a Christian bridge between Africa and the Mediterranean world. Monasteries appeared in the highlands. Literacy expanded as scripture demanded reading. For a moment, it seemed AksUM had mastered time itself. Stone, gold, and heaven were aligned. But history never allows balance to last. New powers were rising in Arabia. Trade routes were shifting. Climate patterns began to change. And faith, once a unifying force, would become a boundary. Azana could not see it. AksUM had already begun its slow turn toward isolation. Empires fall not when they lose faith, but when the world around them changes faster than belief can follow. After Azana, AksUM did not collapse. It settled into ritual, scripture, and memory. The cross became as familiar as the sun. Churches dotted the highlands. Monasteries rose where once only shepherds wandered. The kingdom learned to pray as deeply as it once learned to conquer. Yet beneath this sacred calm, the world was shifting. Christianity in AksUM did not erase the land's ancient soul. Instead, it sanctified it. Mountains became holy. Springs were blessed. Caves turned into places of retreat. Monks withdrew from cities, seeking purity in isolation. They fasted, copied texts, and argued theology beneath starlight. These monks were not powerless figures. They advised kings. They settled disputes. They preserved history in ink and parchment. AksUM's identity grew quieter, but deeper. Trade continued, but its nature changed. Christian merchants traveled with crosses sewn into cloaks. Jewish traders maintained networks linking Africa, Arabia, and India. Pagan sailors still carried incense and ivory. AksUM remained tolerant, not out of ideology, but necessity. The port of Agilis thrived. Goods moved, languages blended, beliefs coexisted uneasily. Yet something subtle had begun to weaken AksUM's grip. The Red Sea was no longer exclusive. Global trade routes were evolving. Roman demand declined. Indian connections grew uncertain. New Arabian powers began to control ports closer to the sea's mouth. Ships bypassed traditional stops. Caravans took longer paths. AksUM did not lose wealth overnight. It lost centrality. As trade faded, faith filled the vacuum. Kings leaned more heavily on religious legitimacy. Royal power became inseparable from church authority. Monasteries gained land, labor, and influence. Scripture became law. Tradition hardened. This protected AksUM's soul but limited its flexibility. Empires require adaptation. AksUM chose preservation. By the 6th century, a new force stirred in Arabia, unified tribes. Energized by new belief systems and political momentum, began to dominate trade and territory. The Red Sea, once AksUM's lifeline, became contested. AksUM fought when it could. It sent armies across the sea once more, intervening in Arabian politics, defending Christian allies. These campaigns were costly. Victories were temporary. The sea no longer obeyed AksUM's will. There was no single fall. No burning capital. No conquering army. Instead, AksUM withdrew. The capital shifted. Stele stopped rising. Coins grew rare. Power moved inland, away from the sea, into the mountains where faith could survive even without trade. AksUM faded from maps, but not from memory. What AksUM lost in empire, it gained in endurance. Its Christian tradition survived centuries of isolation. Its language evolved into sacred script. Its kings traced their lineage to ancient promises. Its churches, carved into living rock, would outlast kingdoms. AksUM did not vanish. It transformed. From empire to inheritance. When empires retreat from the world, they do not always die. Sometimes they remember themselves into survival. AksUM did not fall in fire or conquest. It faded like twilight slowly, deliberately carrying its past inward, into mountains, monasteries, and myth. What remained was not weakness, but continuity. The kingdom entered its shadow age. As Red Sea trade slipped beyond reach, the old capital lost its pulse. Markets quieted. Foreign tongues vanished. The great stele stood unmoving, their meaning intact, but their audience gone. Power migrated southward. Kings ruled from less exposed regions, choosing security over splendor. Courts became mobile. Authority was expressed through ritual rather than monuments. The crown survived by becoming invisible. Yet royal bloodlines endured. They preserved genealogies with obsessive care, tracing descent not merely from Ezana or ancient kings, but from Solomon himself, through the Queen of Sheba. Whether history or legend, the claim mattered less than what it achieved. It made the kingdom eternal. Without trade wealth, literacy became power. Monasteries turned into libraries. Scribes copied scripture in Jez, turning language into a sacred vessel. Biblical narratives blended with AksUMite memory, binding past and present into a single story of divine election. The state no longer ruled by gold. It ruled by text. Law codes merged Christian ethics with ancient custom. Kings were judged not by conquest, but by piety. To rebel against the throne was to rebel against God's order. Faith replaced empire. The world beyond the highlands changed rapidly. New, Powers dominated the Red Sea and the Arabian Peninsula. Islam reshaped trade, politics, and belief across regions AksUM once commanded. Yet the Highland Kingdom endured not by confrontation, but by distance. Isolation became armor. Surrounded by geography and belief. The kingdom survived centuries that erased others. It neither expanded nor surrendered. It waited. By the early medieval period, AksUM as an empire was gone, but Ethiopia had been born. Its rulers inherited AksUM's sacred kingship, Christian identity, and sense of chosenness. The memory of steely coins and sea power lived on in chronicles and liturgy. AksUM had ceased to rule the world. It had learned to outlast it. When history grows quiet, legend speaks louder. As AksUM's armies vanished from foreign shores and its ships no longer ruled the Red Sea, its story did not shrink. Instead, it expanded into myth, scripture, and sacred imagination. What stone and gold could no longer proclaim, legend would preserve. This was the age when memory became divine. Long before Azana, long before Stele pierced the sky, there lived a queen whose shadow stretched across centuries. She was known by many names. Makeda in Ethiopian tradition, the Queen of Sheba in Hebrew scripture, a ruler of wealth, wisdom, and irresistible authority. According to Ethiopian chronicles, Makeda ruled a powerful kingdom in the highlands, wise, curious, and unafraid of distant power. When she heard of King Solomon, whose wisdom was said to flow like a river from God himself, she journeyed to Jerusalem. The journey was not submission. It was a meeting of equals. The Kebra, Nagus, the glory of kings, tells what followed. Makeda tested Solomon with riddles. He answered them all. They debated law, faith, and power. In time, they shared not only wisdom, but a son. When Menelik came of age, he traveled to Jerusalem to meet his father. Solomon recognized him immediately. He offered him the throne of Israel. Menelik refused. He returned, south carrying with him something far greater. The greatest claim of Ethiopian tradition is also its most audacious. The Ark of the Covenant, the sacred vessel holding God's law, did not remain in Jerusalem. It was taken with divine approval to AksUM. There it would remain hidden, guarded, untouchable. Whether history or belief, the claim achieved something remarkable. It placed AksUM not at the margins of biblical history, but at its center. From Solomon came a title. From the Ark came authority. AksUM's kings styled themselves the Lion of Judah, rulers by divine inheritance. Their power was no longer measured by territory, but by covenant. They were not conquerors of land, but guardians of God's promise. This myth reshaped politics. Kings ruled as sacred beings. Coronations became religious ceremonies. The throne became an altar. To overthrow a king was to challenge heaven itself. As centuries passed, Ethiopia stood alone as a Christian kingdom, surrounded by shifting powers. Yet legend reinforced resilience. The Ark protected them. The lineage justified them. The faith unified them. Isolation no longer meant weakness. It meant CHOSENNESS. By the time European travelers rediscovered Ethiopia, AksUM was no longer a capital of empire, but a holy city. Pilgrims walked among fallen stele with reverence. Churches guarded relics and stories. Memory had triumphed over ruin. AksUM's greatest victory was not conquest. It was continuity. Empires crumble. Words fade, but stone remembers. Long after kings stopped minting gold and armies vanished into legend, AksUM remained silent, broken, yet unyielding. Its monuments did not plead for attention. They waited. For centuries, the stele stood alone. Travelers passed near AksUM without understanding what they saw. Towering stones lay fallen like giants struck down by time. Others stood upright, scarred by wind and sun. Local people treated them with reverence not as ruins, but as ancestors, frozen in place. No guidebook explained them. No empire claimed them. AksUM survived outside history, beneath the soil. Inscriptions slept. Written in Gez, Greek, and South Arabian scripts. They recorded victories, dedications, and prayers. They named gods forgotten elsewhere. They spoke of kings whose faces no coin preserved. When scholars finally arrived centuries later, they realized something startling. Africa had produced an empire that spoke fluently to the ancient world, and then stepped away. The greatest stele lay broken, once towering over 30 meters high. It had collapsed during construction or soon after erection. Its shattered pieces lay like ribs across the earth. No conqueror had destroyed it. It had fallen under its own ambition. That broken monument became a metaphor for AksUM itself, not defeated, but strained by greatness. In the 20th century, foreign powers returned, not as traders, but as occupiers. One stele was cut into sections and transported abroad, displayed as a trophy. For decades, it stood far from its home, stripped of context and meaning. Yet memory persisted. In time, the stone returned. When it was reassembled and raised once more, it did not mark a revival of empire, but a restoration of dignity. Modern excavations revealed palaces, tombs, coins, and churches. Each layer confirmed what legend claimed. AksUM was no myth. It had minted gold. It had ruled seas. It had chosen faith early. History had simply looked away. The stele do not explain themselves. They do not boast or threaten. They stand or lie bearing witness to a civilization that believed eternity could be carved. In that belief, they were right. History often pretends that power flows in straight lines from Europe outward, from empires west to east. AksUM breaks that illusion. It stood at the crossroads of worlds, not a borderland, not a periphery, but a pivot. The Red Sea was not a barrier. It was a road. AksUM controlled its western shore at the exact moment global trade was expanding faster than armies could follow. Monsoon winds turned the Indian Ocean into a predictable circuit. Roman merchants learned to sail directly to India, bypassing overland routes. AksUM sat between them all. From Rome came gold coins and wine. From India came spices and silk. From Africa came ivory and power. Every exchange passed under AksUM's watch. Roman riders did something unusual. They respected AksUM. It was named among the great powers of the age alongside Rome, Persia, and China. This was not courtesy. It was recognition. AksUMite kings minted coins with Greek inscriptions specifically for Mediterranean trade. Roman merchants settled in AksUMite ports. Diplomatic gifts traveled both directions. Rome did not conquer AksUM. It negotiated. To the east, Persia watched carefully. The Sassanid Empire sought control over trade routes linking India and the Mediterranean. AksUM's Red Sea presence complicated Persian ambition. Each power maneuvered through alliances in Arabia, supporting rival kingdoms, funding proxy wars. AksUM was not passive. It crossed seas, intervened militarily, and dictated terms when possible. Its power was not based on endless land, but on precise control of movement. India was never conquered by AksUM. It didn't need to be. Trade tied them together more effectively than empire ever could. Indian goods flowed into AksUMite markets. Cultural ideas moved alongside them: astronomy, medicine, luxury goods. AksUM's genius was restraint. It ruled without annexing. AksUM who something. Modern history often forgets. Africa was not waiting to be discovered. It was already connected, already powerful, already global. AksUM did not imitate the ancient world. It shaped it. When global trade shifted and new powers rose, AksUM did not fight the tide endlessly. It withdrew with dignity, preserving faith and identity rather than burning itself out in resistance. That choice allowed something rare. Survival. Empires do not always fall. Some simply exhale, releasing the world they once held. AksUM's end was not written in blood or fire. There was no single defeat, no conquering army to mark the moment history turned away. Instead, decline arrived quietly through soil, wind, and distance. The highlands had fed empire for centuries. Terraced fields once yielded abundant grain. Forests provided timber and fuel. But generations of intensive farming and construction left scars. Soil thinned. Trees vanished. Rains grew unpredictable. The land that had sustained monuments could no longer sustain expansion. Food shortages did not cause immediate collapse, but they reduced surplus. And without surplus, empire becomes memory. AksUM's wealth had always moved along water. When maritime routes shifted toward Persian Gulf ports and new Arabian powers dominated sea lanes, AksUM's advantage weakened. Agilis declined. Caravans arrived less frequently. The kingdom did not starve. It narrowed. Gold stopped flowing. Coins disappeared from circulation. Foreign diplomats stopped coming. AksUM turned inward. As coastal influence faded, authority retreated uphill. The court followed. From these natural fortresses, rulers governed smaller territories. Control became personal rather than imperial. Loyalty replaced taxation. Ritual replaced spectacle. This was not failure, it was adaptation. Christianity, once an expansionist identity, became a shield. Churches unified scattered communities. Monasteries preserved law, history, and literacy. Faith replaced global ambition with eternal purpose. Empires end when they lose meaning. AksUM found a new one. By the 7th century, AksUM no longer appeared in foreign records. Yet within its borders, life continued uninterrupted. Kings ruled. Churches rang bells. Legends grew stronger as facts faded. AksUM did not collapse. It transitioned. History often remembers beginnings and endings. What it forgets are continuations. AksUM did not end. It became, out of its stone ruins and sacred texts, emerged a new political and cultural entity, Ethiopia, carrying the soul of empire into a different age. After AksUM's decline as an imperial center, the seat of power wandered. Kings ruled from temporary courts, moving with seasons, threats, and alliances. Authority followed the crown, not the city. This flexibility allowed survival in a fractured landscape. Capital could be destroyed. A tradition could not. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church became the kingdom's backbone. It preserved the Ge'ezi language long after it ceased to be spoken daily. It guarded texts that blended scripture, history, and myth. It crowned kings and judged legitimacy. Faith was no longer one institution among many. It was the state itself. New legal codes echoed ancient AksUMite values: divine kingship, moral law, and sacred authority. Rulers styled themselves guardians rather than conquerors. The myth of Solomonic descent matured into political doctrine. To rule Ethiopia was to inherit AksUM, whether in fact or belief. While much of the world passed through conquest and conversion, Ethiopia remained distinct, Christian, African, independent. This identity was not accidental. It was AksUM's final gift. Centuries later, when modern nations emerged, Ethiopia stood as proof of continuity unmatched on the continent. Its resilience baffled outsiders. Its traditions puzzled empires, but the explanation lay beneath fallen stelae and ancient crosses. AksUM had taught Ethiopia how to endure. Some empires conquer land, others conquer time. AksUM belongs to the second kind. Its greatness is not measured by how far its armies marched, but by how deeply its ideas endured. To understand AksUM is to challenge the way history itself is often told. AksUM did not copy Rome or Persia. It engaged them as an equal. Its kings adopted Greek language without surrendering identity. They used foreign trade without becoming dependent. They embraced Christianity without abandoning African tradition. AksUM demonstrates that influence does not require imitation, that it requires confidence. For centuries, global history was written as if Africa waited on the margins. AksUM destroys that myth. It was literate when much of Europe was not. It minted gold while others bartered. It practiced international diplomacy while many kingdoms remained local. Africa did not enter world history through conquest. It was already there. AksUM's conversion to Christianity was not weakness. It was strategy. Faith unified diverse peoples, legitimized kingship, and anchored identity when trade collapsed. When empire became impossible, belief preserved nationhood. Few states have survived such a transformation. AksUM did not fit later narratives. It was African, Christian, ancient, and independent. It left no conquering army to retell its story. It shows withdrawal over domination. History often favors noise. AksUM preferred silence, fallen stele, sacred manuscripts, living faith. These are not ruins. They are arguments. Arguments that civilization does not move in a single direction. Arguments that power can retreat without vanishing. Arguments that endurance matters more than spectacle. AksUM reminds us that the past is larger than we are. Taught, the past does not vanish. It waits to be heard. In modern Ethiopia, AksUM is no longer an imperial capital, yet it has never stopped being a center. Pilgrims still walk its paths. Priests still chant in ancient tongues. Stones still cast long shadows across the land, as if measuring time itself. AksUM speaks softly, insistently to the present. Today, AksUM is a living city. Markets rise where caravans once rested. Children play near monuments older than recorded history. Churches ring bells that echo rituals centuries old. The ancient and the ordinary exist side by side without apology. The Church of St. Mary of Zion, believed by tradition to house the Ark of the Covenant, remains the city's spiritual heart. One guardian alone is said to watch over the Ark, never leaving its presence. Whether symbol or reality, the belief binds generations together. Here, faith is not nostalgia. It is continuity. In the modern era, AksUM experienced both loss and restoration. One of its greatest, stele removed during foreign occupation, stood far from home for decades. When it was finally returned and re-erected, the act carried weight beyond archaeology. It was not just stone coming back, it was memory reclaimed. The raising of the stele marked a rare moment when history moved backward to heal itself. A monument once taken as conquest returned as acknowledgement. For Ethiopians, AksUM is not a chapter, it is a foundation. It confirms ancient statehood. It affirms religious endurance. It anchors identity beyond colonial timelines. In a world that often measures legitimacy through recent power, AksUM offers something older and stronger: historical depth. UNESCO listings and academic studies have brought international attention. Scholars analyze inscriptions, carbon date ruins, and debate timelines. Yet for locals, AksUM does not need validation. It has always been real. The stele do not explain themselves. They do not need to. They stand as reminders that greatness does not require permanence, and that memory, when protected, can outlive empire. AksUM is not a relic. It is a voice. Some civilizations are remembered for conquest, others for invention. AksUM is remembered for meaning. that it reshaped how power, belief, and survival could coexist. In doing so, it earned a place not just in African history, but in the story of humanity itself. AksUM did not expand endlessly. It rose, stabilized, adapted, and withdrew. This arc challenges the assumption that empires must either dominate or collapse. AksUM proved a third path. Transformation. It chose endurance over expansion. When AksUM adopted Christianity, it did not erase the past. It absorbed it. Sacred geography replaced sacred temples. Royal legitimacy transformed rather than vanished. Old rhythms survived inside new belief. This synthesis preserved identity instead of breaking. Its retreat is often mistaken for failure. AksUM demonstrates that strategic withdrawal can preserve culture when conquest would destroy it. By stepping away from global competition, it safeguarded what mattered most. Few empires have had the humility to do this. AksUM corrects history. It reminds the world that Africa was not isolated, passive, or peripheral. It produced global powers, intellectual traditions, and enduring institutions long before modern narratives allowed. AksUM demands reconsideration. Most empires live loudly and die suddenly. AksUM lived deeply and never truly died. Its stones remain. Its faith continues. Its identity endures. That is its triumph. Before kings, there was land. Before faith, there was sky. Before memory, there was stone. And in the highlands of Africa, all three met. The stele of AksUM rise from the ground as if the earth itself reached upward, trying to speak to the sky. Carved without iron cranes, raised without written plans. They remain one of humanity's quiet miracles. They do not dominate the landscape. They belong to it. These stones mark not just graves, but ambition, humanity's desire to be remembered, to matter, to leave a trace that time cannot erase. AksUM's greatest rulers were not those who conquered the most land, but those who listened to gods, to trade winds, to change itself. They learned when to expand and when to withdraw. They learned that power is not only the ability to command, but the wisdom to preserve. That lesson echoes long after crowns vanish, when gold stopped flowing and seas grew hostile. Faith held the kingdom together. Christianity in AksUM was not imposed, it was woven. It bound community, law, and identity into a structure stronger than walls. Through belief, AksUM outlived its own empire. Few civilizations manage this. Today, AksUM stands not as a ruin, but as a reminder that Africa shaped the ancient world. That civilization has many centers. That greatness can be quiet. The kingdom that touched the sky did not vanish into legend, that it became inheritance. Empires rise. Empires fall. But some do something rarer. They remain. AksUM remains in stone, in faith, in people, and in the land itself. And as long as those stones stand beneath the Ethiopian sun, history will never truly forget the kingdom that once touched the sky.